Hey, this is Eric from Cafe Watercolor. Happy New Year. Today we're gonna look at a cityscape painting of New York. I'm also going to give this painting away, so at the end of the video, please subscribe, like, and comment. So I hope you had a very good winter vacation and your 2017 has been so far so good. There are a lot of things that I planned for this year, and I hope I'll able to do them all, including video like this. I'm hoping eventually I can do it weekly instead of monthly. Now that's going to be a lot of work because each of these videos take quite a bit of time to make. So aside from doing more painting, I'm hoping to put out more value, both YouTube and my website and Facebook. I'm also going to be more active on Instagram. I've been sharing my work on Instagram, but I'm going to use the Instagram live feature to do some live demo paintings. So far I've been doing one of those live sessions and it's been fun. There are people joining me and there's some people commenting while I paint. Some people asking questions while I paint. It's kind of like a live painting demo in person, but it's on Instagram. So back at this drawing that I'm doing right now, you notice that I try not to lift my pencil. It's a good way to draw like that instead of this little fuzzy hairy line that we used to draw because of trying to be accurate when we were a kid. And for me, the drawing, besides to getting the placement and scale down, is to familiarize yourself with the subject that you're about to paint. Right, drawing is never just getting an accurate line drawing down so you can kind of color it like a coloring book later on. A huge part of it is really just to go over your subject, start hands-on and engage to analyze what you're about to paint. So in this case, all the buildings, the cars, the people, the figures, the scale, and the structure of them. The drawing is a good way to get yourself into the subject that you're about to paint. So while you don't have to make a super accurate drawing for a painting like this, you don't want to skip on that. Okay, so I start the painting. So for this one, I want a blue sky with some clouds just to have a little bit more variations. So what I do is I pre-wet the paper with clean water and just kind of randomly, roughly leaving the white. I leave out the white roughly on where I want the clouds to be. And then I start to mix blue color and just kind of swipe my brush all over, so I have this nice variation of hard edge and wet edge. These are sort of done randomly. While there are some thinking process behind it, I didn't think too hard because I want to kind of just to let it happen randomly. And all of these has to be done in one go. If you wait for a certain part to dry and go back to it, you start to have sort of different edge quality. And this is the background, keep in mind, so you don't have to over invest into it. So as long as there's suggestion of blue sky and white clouds in the background, you're good to go. So while it's still wet, you can kind of modify the shape of the cloud, make some edge softer, adding some water to certain part to make it brighter. But But it's very important before the wash is dry, you need to continue that wash down into the ground. So as I paint closer to the cars and figures and the buildings, I start to creating highlights. I start to look for them and be a little bit more careful not to just cover everything. Right? Especially for the background buildings, you want some highlight to suggest some details later on. And this is also another good way to familiarize yourself with the subject by leaving a highlight, by slowing down a little bit to look at what you're painting. So I mix a darker and cooler color as it comes down. So I also leave out some white, and I do this directional line before the layer is dry. What I basically do is to have a clean brush and I squeeze the water out. So just a little bit of water that creates a nice directional line. And now start with the background buildings. So this is Madison Avenue. So if you're familiar with New York, that's where the Chrysler Building is. So even though I'm not going to do a very detailed rendering of the building, I want to make sure that the silhouette is recognizable. So people see that, people kind of able to tell that, oh, that looks like a Chrysler Building. So for the background building, you mostly just want it to be one shape. So you have to be done in one wash. But while that wash is still wet, you can add more color variation, like I add some blues on the top, and as it comes down, I make it warmer. So you can play with the color a lot when the wash is still wet. While it is alive, you can play as much as you want. And that's the fun thing for painting the watercolor. So as I continue down, I extend that wash over and paint the building on the left side. You can tell that I spend a little bit more time. I be a little bit more careful when it comes to the top of the building, because there are quite a few architectural details, and that's what makes the silhouette, right? The edge and the top. So if I spend a little bit more time on those, I can have some delicate details without making it too complicated. And as I paint the shape down, I start to watch for perspective. So I start to leave out more highlights, but some of them are also following the perspective. And that's pretty important because you're painting a cityscape, right? There's always perspective involved, and you also want more depth and more dimension. So while I don't paint every little detail on the building, which is going to be insane if you look at the original photo, there are a lot of architectural details on these buildings. So I'm not going to spend time painting every little detail, but the little suggestive highlight, it has to follow the perspective. And when you do that, the people who look at your painting will start to make sense out of it. So when they see the highlights and the line that follows with perspective, their mind will automatically start to think of where the building is facing, where it is going, and it also lead people's eyes into the distance. So the building on the right is a little bit tricky because there's some nice sunlight hitting the buildings on the right, but it also has some cast shadow from the buildings on the left. So I'm trying to get that in. And it's funny because I want it to look nice and fresh. So even though it is a little bit complicated, I'm trying to paint it and make it look like I'm not trying too hard. Some clean water and soften the edge of the background buildings, so it feels like the building is fading into the distance. This will create more depth. So now I'm starting to add just a little bit more details on the right buildings. So those little dark lines that I'm painting, if you look at the source material, you can kind of see what I'm trying to do there. I'm trying to mimicking the light and the shadow that's happening, that's going on the buildings on the right. Because in a picture like this where there's a direct sunlight, the combination of light and shadow really helps the viewer to see the form turning. So now I'm painting the little windows, and you can see the shadows that's casting from the left side. Now the left building is dry, so I'm going back, put on another wash that's a little bit darker. Now I could have left that wash the way it is, but I wanted to make this painting just a little bit more sophisticated. So I put on another wash just to add some more details and also just to add another layer of depth. So that building will separate from the background a little bit more. But you have to do that when the paint is dry. If you do that while it is still wet, the shape is just going to mush together and you won't have a nice art edge. So as it is drying, I start to make some dry brushing marks. So those lines that follows the perspective. Now this is the stage that I need a lot of faith because when I was painting, I feel that it's not coming together the way I wanted to. And this happened in almost every painting. There's a stage that you are just not seeing it resolving. And it can be frustrated and it can be a very scary process. And I start to add just a little bit more detail with lines, with a dark shape. And notice those little dark lines that I paint, I have it follow the form. So it work with the structure of the buildings. So those little dark lines are actually just the shadow of the building structures, right? You have some windows and you have some extruded surface on the building and they're casting shadows. They're occluding some light. It's basically that. You're just suggesting the different little change of form on the building. Now use a palette knife, can kind of scrape some of the paint off to create a little bit of variation, some highlights, some details. But it's important to know that you have to do that while the paint is still wet and the paint has to be pretty thick. Otherwise you're just scraping the paper. Now the wash is dry, mostly dry on the right side, so I just glaze over a warm value. I just can't leave it white. And it is warm sunlight, so some warm color glazing will make it look more like sunlight is hitting it. And back to the building on the left, I decided to glaze over because it feels a little bit weak. So even though I glazed the building on the left over, you can still kind of see that the shape merged together as one value group. So that's one of the reasons I paint standing up, because I can step back anytime I want. Because you're looking at a whole picture right now, but when I paint, I don't see the whole picture, right? I see the part that I'm painting, and it's very easy to get carried away and focus on that part. So standing up allow me to step back pretty often and check the whole painting, see if the value relationship is right. So the building on the left is a lot darker, so I decided to paint over again, leave some window out. So if you miss the opportunity to make the value the way you want in the first wash, you can always wait it to dry and to paint over again. But you don't try to go back in before it's completely dry and try to fix something. Now I get to the car, do a wash on the windshield. And to have a nice saturate yellow color, because this is a yellow cab, a nice yellow cab in New York City. Some dark value on the bottom of the car, so you feel like the form's turning. A little bit darker yellow on the right side of the car, because it is on the shadow side. Now the shadows on the bottom anchors the car down. And I just extend the shadow out because I want it to be one clean shape. So before I go on and do any other cars, I just make that whole shadow in one go. So besides the shadow of the car, there's also the shadow of the buildings on the left that's casting a huge shadow in the foreground. So what I'm doing right now is I'm painting the reflection on the windshield. So those reflection are the reflection of the buildings on the left that we don't really see in the painting. So that reflection also casting shadows. So after that car is done, I'm just quickly moving on to other cars. The yellow cab is the first car I paint, and the car that's pretty much in front of every other car. So that car I spend a little bit more time and be a little bit more careful on that. The other cars are more just suggestions. It's the yellow cab that makes all the other shape that looks like a car. And the car that is moving away from us, and there's some distant cars, and you can kind of see that like in the distance the car is pretty much just I just do it with two brush stroke, the dark windshield and the dark body of the car, and then adding some cast shadow, and that's pretty much it. So it's all about your visual language, right? You don't have to paint everything that you see, but if you understand the form and the structure, you're able to translate into a visual language. You're able to paint it with minimum amount of detail and brushstroke, and it is still very effective. And if you ask me, I think that's actually better because you are able to differentiate foreground and the background by the amount of detail that you paint. So I move on to the figure. What I do is I just paint their faces first and wait for those to dry. I move on to the figure in the front. So I was going to just paint him walking, but I think it might be fun if he's doing something a little bit different. So he's kind of hailing for a cab. So I have his hand raised up and slightly leaning forward to the street. So you can see that it started to look very busy. And that's what I want, right? It's New York, it's busy. I've been to New York once. I forgot how long ago, probably 12 years ago. And it was funny, I didn't really like it because it's so crowded, the pace is so fast. But I miss out on a lot of amazing city sceneries. But I wasn't painting then, so now that I start to paint watercolor everywhere I go, I start to ask myself, does this scenery make a good painting? If it does, I take a picture and I deliberately looking for sceneries that I can able to paint later on. So last winter, I went back to California where I used to live, to a lot of places that I was there pretty often when I lived there, but I'm able to see it with a fresh pair of eyes. So going back to the painting, so now you can see that the reason I left those highlights on the top of the figure so that they can pop out a little bit more, especially on top of the head and the shoulder, so they're catching light. So against the dark background of the building, those figures really pops out. So some figures on the background, I just paint them very loose. They just kind of have to be there to make it feel really crowded and busy. So now is the stage that I start to know that, okay, this picture is working. So it's time to add a little bit more details and little fine jewelries, little fine details that just make the painting look better. But as far as the whole picture goes, it's pretty much done. So if at this stage the painting is still not working, I'll probably just call it a failed painting and move on, try again. But I'm glad this painting worked out the way it is. And there's never a perfect painting for me. I mean, there's always things that I could have done better. But as a picture, as an image, this is working. So I still call it a successful painting. So white gouache sparkles some highlights here and there. Now there's some American flag hanging out. So it's time to paint those. I need to make sure everything's dry so the paint just doesn't melt into the building. I want to separate them a little bit more. So these are painted very loosely, right? I'm not painting every stripe perfectly. Because first, it's not the point of the painting, and second, I want to make it look like the flag is kind of flapping and moving. And some very light pull on the flag, those has to be light. And some happy little birds. And we're finished. I hope you like this painting. And remember, I'm giving this painting away, so please subscribe, like, and comment, and I'll pick up a winner next month. We will see you next time. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe and visit my website at cafewatercolor.com. Sign up for my newsletter to receive Fast Track Watercolor PDF guide. It is a 32 pages guide that I made to help you get started with watercolor. If you like my paintings, please also check out my product page.